Hello, my name is Argy Fisher. My therapist advised me to write down what I've been through, so I suppose I will. It's been a week, and I typically have bad memory, but I still remember everything vividly. So damn vividly. I'll try my best to recount the details, but after all I've been through, I can't promise it will be good. Now, where to begin? It started with a trip I decided to take. I was getting exhausted and tired with people and society, and really just life in general. I decided I'd go camping in some deep woods. I'd rather not state the location, however. Apologies for that. There were beautiful, lush trees. I could hear the birds singing and animals moving about. The bugs were a bit annoying, but it was worth it. The way the light filtered beneath the gently moving leaves, the soft breeze coming in from the west, the light rustling of foliage as small animals moved. It was a beautiful sight. I took the camping supplies I packed out of the back of my truck, double-checked I had everything, and decided to head north, since I came from the south. There weren't really many paths here. It was just wilderness, and some back road dead end I decided I'd go to. I wandered for a while in the woods, making sure to keep a map on hand, and a compass, tracing where I went. Eventually, I came across a nice-looking clearing. I cleared the area of rocks, debris, pieces of wood, and anything that would make sleeping rough. Then, I set up my tent. A nice, deep, green, small tent, just large enough for me, and my travel pack. I checked the distance and time I'd hiked, and saw it was only about 1 kilometer and around 10 minutes. Just after, I looked at the sky to get a rough estimate of the time, and noticed the sun was beginning to set. On the other side of the horizon, I noticed a large amount of clouds rolling in. Just my luck. No matter what it is, I always seem to forget something. It's usually just one thing, whether it's a spice in a recipe or, in this case, checking the weather. I decided I'd take a walk around, where I set up before going to bed. I spent around 30 minutes or an hour or so. I'm bad at keeping track of time. Just slowly walking around, admiring nature, before I decided to return to my tent. As I approached, I felt like something was off. The closer I got, the more the feeling grew and grew. I was having trouble figuring out exactly what it was, but then I noticed. The tarp on my tent was slightly damp. I felt a little nervous, since I'm generally a bit of a paranoid person. So I quietly walked around the perimeter of my tent. I didn't see anything odd. Finally, I ended at the entrance and noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I cautiously approached, listening carefully. As I got close, my nerves started acting up. Stupid anxiety. I told myself to just shrug it off, but I couldn't. I don't know why, but I froze. I was scared something would be in there. I managed, after about a minute of standing still with one hand reaching towards the door, to open the front of the tent. Everything was normal inside. I let out a long sigh of relief and felt around. Everything was dry, apart from a small damp patch near the door. The sun was almost down, and it was getting darker. I decided I'd go to bed now, as the sounds of wildlife were shifting from diurnal to nocturnal creatures. I laid down in my cozy little snug sleeping bag, making sure everything was neatly organized, still in my bed, and went to bed. I awoke to the sound of rain falling. I'd reckon a few hours later, and felt a little groggy. I realized I had to go to the bathroom, which would mean having to leave the tent. I sighed deeply, part of me regretting my choice to camp. I turned to go get my raincoat out of my bag. I always come prepared, even if I forget things. I paused as I shifted. Something didn't feel quite right. I listened to the sound of the rain falling for a while before I noticed what it was. There was a wet splash, coming from outside. I paused and listened carefully. I noticed it was following a pattern and sounded like large raindrops splashing in puddles. It was circling my tent, keeping the same pace while doing so. It was, at that moment, something else occurred to me. The raindrops on my tent were much lighter here and less frequent than those on the ground, coming from the direction of whatever was circling my tent. The rain was very light, apart from in that one specific area. Slowly, I reached over my bag. I always stored a small pocket knife in the side pouch of my bag for self-defense. I wanted to make sure I was protected when I was confronted, whoever or whatever it was. Maybe it was just a really wet raccoon or something sloshing up the water. I slowly crept to the edge of my tent and paused. I waited for the footsteps to go behind my tent before I slowly zipped a small crack in the zipper so I could see out, as quietly and slowly as I could. I waited for what felt like forever. But, as cliche as this is, was likely just a few seconds. I know that's something that's said a lot, but you really don't realize how accurate it is until you've experienced it yourself. I heard the footsteps approaching where I was peeking, and to my horror, I saw some strange-looking thing. It was about the size of a human, but appeared to be made entirely of water. I couldn't make out too much of its features due to the darkness of night and clouds, but I did notice the shine of water and the dripping. I felt like I was being watched, like it knew I was here, like it was going to come for me sooner or later, or it was waiting for me to make a move. I slowly shifted back inside and started to breathe to calm my nerves. In. Hold. Out. Pause. In. Hold. Out. Pause. I started to focus again, and still listening to sounds, slowly and quietly made sure to get myself in order. Putting on my raincoat, getting my bag ready, and putting it on. I made sure I was holding my keys in a way that I could easily unlock my car when I got there. I waited for the thing to move in front of my tent. I watched as it walked by, and as soon as I was sure it wouldn't see me, carefully and quietly but swiftly, opened the door. I took a deep breath, and as I heard it was on the opposite side, I thanked past it for facing the tent towards the car and started sprinting. Immediately I heard whatever it was start chasing, and I heard the splashing of its footsteps. I heard my tent tear as it ran through it. I'd estimate at the same pace as me, or ever so slightly slower. I couldn't slow down. I couldn't mess up. I ran through the trees, weaving my way through, and I heard several loud slaps of water against the trees, seeming like It didn't need to navigate through the trees. I was almost to where my car was when I tripped on a root and landed with a hard thump, catching myself with my hands on a rock. This was it. I was done for. I saw my life flash before my eyes, and I heard its weight shift, and I felt a massive amount of pain on my side, and I passed out. I woke up a few hours later, in a lot of pain. The sun was out, and I could hear the wildlife. It took me a few seconds to realize I wasn't dead, and I immediately shifted over to check my bag, and to no longer be face down on a muddy rock. As soon as I did, a searing pain shot through my right side. I looked down and noticed I was wounded. My bag was torn apart, my shirt with a large gash, and bleeding. The wound was deep, but not too deep. I'm lucky it didn't kill me, but I felt lightheaded and hazy. The bleeding seemed to have stopped due to my shirt being slightly displaced, and the wetness causing it to cling to my body. I used my torn and broken backpack to cover the wound, grabbed as much of the contents as I could, and quickly headed to my truck. The windows of my truck were cracked, and a lot of the paint seemed to be damaged. I quickly found my keys. Luckily, they hadn't slipped out of my hand, and opened the door. I then dropped everything in the passenger seat. I was about to go retrieve the last of my items and equipment when I heard a soft splash, splash. I immediately got into the truck, started the engine, and drove out of there, returning home. Before I was gone, however, I noticed a blurry silhouette in the rearview mirror. I decided I didn't want to see it more clearly. I relayed all of this to my therapist, and he suggested I say what happened. So, I guess writing it down did help a bit. I still worry that it's out there, but I know for damn sure I'll never get near it. And I'll never camp again. If you were ever traveling in or around a forested area and see lights outside of your vehicle or in the distance, I suggest that you find the fastest route out of there, for you don't want to know what these lights are. If it makes you feel better, you aren't alone in these sightings. Thousands have reported seeing a bright flash or flickering light somewhere deep in the woods. It's all over the United States, specifically in the Pacific Northwest or the Appalachian Mountains. For the rest of the world, I do not know. I have seen the lights only once before, and I almost didn't live to tell the tale. My encounter was in Tennessee. I believe in the summer of 1997. I was traversing a barren highway at the dead of night, with no other cars in sight. I was on the highway at that time because I was going to visit family down south. I was beginning to regret not stopping for the night, for my eyes were getting heavy, and I was growing ever so tired as the time passed on. It got so bad that I pulled off into a little gravel shoulder on the side of the highway. Before I dozed off, I noticed the time on my dashboard of my car. It read 11:58 p.m. I promptly fell asleep. I awoke to something, though I couldn't figure out then. I looked again at the time on the dashboard, 4:03 in the morning. I'd been asleep for about 4 hours. I focused my dreary gaze on the highway in front of me, and then I saw it. A flash, just up on the horizon, in the woods. I thought I was dreaming at first. Then, it happened again. This time, a little closer to the road. I didn't know what to think, other than that whatever that was, it was supernatural. Another flash happened, this time at the foot of the tree line, about 150 or so yards away from my idle car. It was getting closer. I began to hear cracking in the trees, as if a not present wind was swaying them. I was scared to the point where I wanted to hide in my car and pray to the Lord that whatever it was would leave me be. Another flash, this time engulfing the road ahead of me, and with that, I lost it. I jammed my keys into the ignition, and my car roared to life. I put the gear in reverse and floored it. I whipped around in my car and put the gear back into drive. I looked in the rearview mirror, just as the next flash occurred. I swear, there was some ungodly thing running toward my car, illuminated by the paranormal light. I screamed and gunned it down the highway. The engine under my hood squealed as I stomped the gas pedal into the floor. That thing was gaining on my car at speeds too great to be possible for any humanoid. I was still a good 300 feet ahead of it, and I was by now topping 90 miles an hour. In hindsight, the thing was probably running at around 105. I focused on the rearview mirror, and I got a better look at the beast. It was tall, maybe around 14 feet tall. Its skin was a mesh of bone, rotting flesh, and who knows what else. Its hands, or rather claws, had daggers hanging off of its fingers, sharp enough to cut metal in half, no problem. Its face was the most terrifying aspect of it. Its jaw was unhinged, almost like a snake. Its teeth were bent and crooked, stained with mud and bits of various material. And its eyes, they were massive. They glowed a crimson red and seemed to penetrate your very soul. I about threw up at the sight of the beast, at just how impossible this thing was. I was beginning to realize I will die in these hills. I glanced at the speedometer, and seeing the needle to be hovering over the 110 mile an hour mark. Another flash, and I saw the thing too close for comfort behind me. I was about 50 feet ahead of it, but that gap was closing fast. I flew over a hill and I saw a light in the distance. I suddenly knew where I was. I was nearing the end of the woods and approaching the nearby town next to it. I thank God I had a shot at survival and began blaring my horn, trying to alert anyone who would be up at this hour. I heard a roar and my car lurched forwards. The thing was right behind my car and was trying to topple it. My car was reaching 120, which was the most it could offer. The lights were growing bigger in the distance, and I guessed it was about 100 yards more before I would be out of those woods. The creature again lifted the rear of my car, and I was lifted into the air. It had caught me, and I was so close to freedom. I dove over the center console and opened the glove compartment. I pulled out the pistol that was inside and loaded a magazine into the gun. I bought it for safety reasons, and this was the perfect time to utilize it. I chambered around, stuck my arm out of the window of my car. I realized I was face to face with that thing, and I aimed the gun in its eyes. I squeezed the trigger, and the thing roared in obvious pain. I shot it at least 5 times, and even after it dropped me on the pavement below, I fired at it until the gun was empty of bullets. It darted back into the woods. I turned and sprinted the remainder of the way into town. The police had heard the gunshots, found me wandering the streets, covered in that thing's blood. I was taken into the police department and told them my story. Nobody believed me. Until the next day, I led them back to the side of my car, or what was left of it. Nobody could explain the wreckage. They couldn't explain the blood trailing off into the woods. They couldn't explain the claw marks and handprints too large for humans on the back of my car. I believe the thing came from the flashes in the woods. And if you ever see one, turn around and floor it back out of the woods before you end up like me. I shouldn't have been so foolish as to take a walk in the woods at such an hour. I feel even more foolish to have brought my little brother along with me. A good idea is what I thought, me and my brother just hanging out, shooting, and afterwards we would grab some grub. Once arriving, the sky seemed a little gray, but we agreed to at least hurdle ourselves a small way through the woods. Before we knew it, we were a little further in than we had planned. The night swallowed the forest quickly, so we decided to hightail out. On our walk back, it got dark, really dark. Thus, I plopped out my flashlight and let the light cast over our desired direction. I joked about what could be hiding in the woods to my little brother, hoping our not-so-subtle gap in age would allow me to give him the willies. It worked, but unfortunately what I didn't account for was for his fear to become slightly contagious. I was just waiting for the snapping of a branch to whip my consciousness into a slight panic. I felt nervous of what may lay beyond the circumference of the light, so much so that I almost couldn't pull the beam into another direction. Our voices went silent, both of us unconsciously fearing that something may hear us. Each step taken by the two of us was amplified and seemingly impossible to muffle. I was scared. I was consumed in thought. My brother pulled my sleeve and silently spoke. "What's that? Over there." I saw another beam of light ahead of us. The beam stayed constant and bright. As we ventured further, the beam became closer and closer and closer. At one point, I could see what was causing this beam of light. Two figures in the distance were walking ahead of us. I felt a little relieved and told my brother, "There's nothing to worry about, just some guys that had the same idea as us most likely." The static feeling throughout my body slowly settled, and I felt more comfortable walking back. Soon, something about the individuals in front of us caught my eye. The clothes they were wearing, they were the same as I and my brother's. I nudged my brother, but before I spoke, I saw the person ahead of me do the same thing. It's the way he did it that caught my eye. The arm didn't smoothly move over to the person beside them as I had done to my brother. Instead, the arm jerked in a quite quick, unnatural whip, like a puppet. I was taken back by the sight. Not acknowledging my brother, who kept pestering me in a whisper. What? What is it?" he kept saying under his breath. I replied nervously, "Nothing." My brother caught on quicker than the flick of a switch. He too acknowledged that the fact the clothes they wore were familiar to us. My brother grabbed my arm and assertively choked out, "Stop." I did, and the people in front of us did the same. My brother looked at me and spoke in a quick pace. "Something's wrong here. This isn't normal, I know. But we have to be calm and keep going, okay?" I said. My brother nodded. That was my only solution at the moment. Be quiet. Try not to say anything. No sudden movements. And keep going until we find our way out. I'm not smart, but I have been in a few dangerous situations, and have picked up this method from them. My brother, on the other hand, has never been confronted with the such, and was starting to panic. I was just as guilty as him in that aspect. Whatever was ahead of us got closer and closer. Even when we slowed down our pace, what was ahead of us slowed down even more so. Then we noticed it from behind, a beam of light. I was shivering. We were very close to them now, and their footsteps were louder than before. My brother spoke in a squeamish tone. "We have to do some..." He stopped speaking, as something else started to, in its hellish garbled tone, repeating my brother's words. It came from the thing in front of us and behind us. I didn't want to turn around and confirm that there were two more, but I knew. I knew that the further we would get, the closer they would become. Even if we were to close to the entrance, it would be too late by then. I had to think fast. I grabbed my brother's arm, turned off the flashlight, and leaped as quickly as I could into the bushes. We ran for a bit, not wanting to be too far off from the path. We ducked as far down as we could and huddled together. Looking back, we saw them. 6 pairs, to be exact. I was guessing we were in the middle of them before we ran. The beams of light were pointed in our direction, but not on us, thankfully. Soon, the beams of light turned away and continued to walk along the path. We followed, not closely whatsoever, but enough so that we could keep track of where the trail was. Those people came to the fork in a road which we had come across on our way through, and by miracle, they took another way than the one we had come from. I instructed my brother to sprint down the trail we had taken on 3, and we did. It was not much farther from there, I thought, car keys already in hand. We were huffing our lungs out, trying desperately to make it to the car quick. My brother screamed. I turned, and was met with a murder of eyes. This point in time was something I would never forget, yet never be able to describe thoroughly. The only thing I could accurately remember is how they ran. It was identical to something wild, fiercely about to pounce its prey. They were so close. I saw the end of the trail and attempted to press the button on my keys to unlock the car. They fumbled out of my left hand, but by a mere stroke of luck, my right hand caught it while my body was in the process of propelling itself forward towards the car. I pressed the unlock button. The headlights flickered. We came to the car, my brother opening and closing the door as fast as he could, and I following in his mannerisms. I shoved the keys in and jerked the vehicle into motion. However, before I could start moving, my brother simply said, "Look." There they were, all 12 in pairs of 6, looking at us, beams almost blinding, yet you could see the horrible image that scarred their faces. Silence bewitched the woods and caressed our voices. Reality soon whipped me back into motion as my instincts waited. Go! Like that, we were off. At home, with burgers in our mouths, my brother wouldn't stop talking about it. I always hear about people going silently stiff after such circumstances, but my brother would not shut up about it. This may sound weird, but I didn't want him to. His voice kept me comfortable, and I entertained his ramblings of what could have been. I'm so glad he's safe. I hope you to stay safe as well. And to assure that, I must urge you this. It's not a very good sign if you're not the only one with a flashlight on in the woods.